Okay, we are touching on over 200 attendees. It's 3 minutes past 6. I think we probably can start. To be fair, I'm going to take a few minutes up in the beginning, and the real important part comes a bit later with our experts anyway. So if you miss the first few minutes, it's not the end of the world. So we're going to begin. So first and foremost, hello everybody, and thank you very much for being here with us today. I hope wherever you are in the world, you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. I think we have a responsibility, and I have a responsibility as today's hosts on a webinar about exactly operating post-COVID-19, to mention, and particularly as the global death toll surpassed 350,000 deaths this week, to mention that the greatest effect of this pandemic has surely been the loss of life. And so it's with immense respect to those who have lost loved ones or even been severely affected by all of this, that today we try to look at COVID-19 with some hope and optimism. And actually a good example of some of the positives we can take out of this is a company I was speaking to based in Northern Europe earlier this week. And they specialize in manufacturing alternatives to plastic. And actually the business was going so well that pre-COVID-19 that they were actually struggling to keep up with demand in terms of their manufacturing. And I was speaking to one of the founders, and he was explaining to me that one of the things that started happening is that they actually were manufacturing a load of sustainable straws, but they knew they had a lot of problems with the manufacturing, but they had to keep up with demand. So just ignoring the problems and just manufacturing over and over again to keep up with the demand that they were having. And COVID-19 came along, and their revenue absolutely dived. But one of the things he was able to do is look at the manufacturing process and everything involved logistically, supplies. And he says that actually now they've lost quite a bit of money over the last couple of months, but he knows that he's probably going to save millions going forward. And it's just one of the examples of things that companies are doing, or could be, or perhaps should be doing at this sort of time. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I told him actually I was going to use it as an example today. And as we will discuss shortly, the opportunities to emerge better and stronger than what we were there, from social relationships to our working lives, to how we look at sustainability and the environment. The opportunities are truly endless. And whether we choose to utilize this opportunity to evolve, and I do mean evolve in all senses of the word, is down to each one of us. And I am hopeful we'll do so. Now, this is probably the most international event I've ever participated in. It's definitely the most international event I've ever hosted. We had registration from over 30 different countries. And in fact, my colleague Tom, who you can see here in the webinar without the video, is our group head of marketing. He's also the moderator for today. He will shortly start a poll to see which continent we have most participants from. Now, of course, time differences don't give certain continents much of a chance, but it will be interesting to see how we are spread out. So Tom, if you please, with the first poll, it'll be very good to see how we're spread out globally in terms of participants today. And we will be using a few polls today. I personally am used to being on Zoom meetings where when presenting you can see participants' faces. Today, this format means we can't do that. So this is just one of the ways we're going to try and engage with you guys a little bit. I do encourage you to participate as much as you can. You'll also notice you're all on mute, that's automatic. But there is a Q&A function, which we again encourage you to use. Please type in any questions you have to the panel, and we will reserve 10 to 15 minutes at the end for any questions, and we'll try and answer as many questions as we can. Now, my name is Paolo Martins, and I am a partner at the Lean Six Sigma company Portugal, and looking after the Portuguese franchise along with my colleague Enrique from here in Portugal. And in fact, I'm live from Portugal as we speak, just south of Lisbon to be exact. And I've personally only been involved with Lean Six Sigma for about a year. And before that, I was working in the finance sector in London. Therefore, I'm certainly not the expert you're all here to listen to on Lean Six Sigma. What we have instead is a very diverse group of black and master black belts from all over the world who represent the Lean Six Sigma company in their respective countries and work day in, day out with people, corporations, and governments who look to implement Lean Six Sigma. We believe they are therefore very well placed to give all of us a bit of an insight on how Lean Six Sigma can help with today's theme. which is operating in a post-COVID-19 world. The main aim of today is to try and give a really global perspective on some of the key problems and opportunities that have resulted on the back of this pandemic, and how we can utilize Lean and Lean Six Sigma to help us overcome some of these issues and make the most out of so many opportunities. However, and this was down from Tom, he asked me to stress that all opinions from myself and all of the panel are of a very personal nature with no affiliation to any third party. Now, during the next 80 to 90 minutes, our experts will address topics ranging from health and safety, new working norms, efficiency, innovation, leadership, and so much more. So hopefully we have an exciting set of themes and topics for you today. But before we reach out to our panel, our group CEO, Misha, is going to give you a brief introduction on who the Lean Six Sigma company is and how we got to where we are today. Misha, if you may, please.
Yes, thank you, Paulo. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our global webinar, and thank you for joining us. My name is Misha van Aalten. Like Paulo said, I am the group CEO and founder of the Lean Six Sigma company. And in the coming 5 minutes, I will give you a short overview of who we are and what we do. I will share my screen with you. We made one drawing to guide you through the presentation. So, if you bear with me. It's a drawing technique we also use in our training. So, here we go. I will start with our journey. We are founded in 2002 in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. And we started to develop our Lean Six Sigma courses for the Dutch market. That was our focus then. Although Lean Six Sigma was more known in the manufacturing sector at the time, we also saw a lot of possibilities in the service sector. And for this reason, we developed tailor-made programs for the service sector. This made us starting growing, and we became one of the largest Lean Six Sigma providers in the Netherlands. But our ambitions reached further, and after we fine-tuned our way of working in 2010, we took our concept abroad. We found entrepreneurs and Lean Six Sigma specialists in other countries. They had the same drive to help individuals and organizations with Lean Six Sigma. So they locally set up the Lean Six Sigma company business in a franchise in most of the cases. And they provided the same high quality training in their local language. This resulted that we nowadays are present in 20 countries and have our materials, books, and exams available in 9 languages. In the meantime, we trained over 25,000 people across the world in Black Belt, Green Belt, Lean Practitioner, and all other Lean Six Sigma roles. This brings me to the next part of the drawing, our mission. Our mission is twofold. First of all, we help organizations to be best in class using Lean Six Sigma. So we train and coach their employees, managers, and help to deploy a structure and culture of continuous improvement. And secondly, we help individuals in their personal development by learning them putting Lean Six Sigma in practice. So for that, we organize open enrollment courses in all countries where we have offices. And our market is very broad because it consists of organizations that are not perfect, but willing to do something about it. It doesn't matter which branch. It can be chemical industry, banks, beer producers, or healthcare. As long as there are processes, there is room for improvement, and we can help these companies with that. There are 5 basics that characterize the Lean Six Sigma company. First of all, we are all about knowledge transfer. We are not doing Lean Six Sigma projects ourselves. We learn individuals and organizations how to do Lean Six Sigma projects and how to implement a structure and culture of continuous improvement. We believe it's more sustainable this way. The second basic is quality through experience. We work with master black belts and lean experts that have worked within Lean Six Sigma organizations. So they have seen Lean Six Sigma work. This way they can relate to the problems of the customers and the process problems they have. The third basic is also important for us. That's independent standards. We want to make sure Our courses and services are the same throughout the world. A black belt trained in Tunisia has the same skills and knowledge as a black belt trained in Sri Lanka or Spain. For this reason, we have based our program and approach on internationally independent standards like the ISO. We are certified for the ISO 8404. This standard describes all skills you need as a master black belt, green belt, or a lean practitioner, and the ISO 13053, which describes the knowledge Lean Six Sigma professionals should have on tools and on methods. A fourth basic is cooperation with universities and higher education. We find this important because they are the experts on learning methods and they help us to improve our courses in this matter. In many countries, we organize training together, like in the UK, in Belgium, and in the Netherlands. The last basic is blended learning techniques. A combination of classroom training, online training, simulations, and remote coaching makes the training a real learning experience. And it's also a way to optimize the time of our participants. So we are also lean in our own courses. The last part of my presentation is a challenge we have as the Lean Six Sigma company. And that is about cooperation. Because we operate in all those different countries, our main challenge is to stimulate and facilitate the cooperation between all these countries and all these partners, making sure knowledge and best practices are shared. That a group of people with different cultures and backgrounds work together to improve our company. I'm convinced in this worldwide COVID crisis, we also need this kind of cooperation and thinking. People, businesses, countries, helping each other to overcome Corona by sharing experience, knowledge, data, and best practices. I think there's a lot to get out of this, this way of thinking and this way of working. This webinar is one of the results of our international cooperation, and I'm very proud that we can present these speakers. So please enjoy listening to the views of our experts on Lean Six Sigma and the post-COVID world. And I hope it gives you some new insights. I'm convinced it will. So thanks for your attention. And let's start with the first speaker. Back to you, Paolo.
Thank you, Misha. That's a really good overview of the Lean Six Sigma company. Whilst the aim of today's webinar isn't to address the Lean Six Sigma company, but the operating post-COVID-19, I'm going to take this opportunity to let you guys know that there's a ton of information on our website, which is leansixsigmacompany.com. Now, my first question of the night, evening, morning, depending where you're situated, goes to our colleague Edwin Boone in the USA. Now, Edwin was born in the Netherlands, but he's worked as the CFO for Hertz Leasing in Europe. He moved at a young age to the USA to be a master black belt for GE and a VP of Lean Six Sigma and customer experience for Sleep Number. For those of you who haven't heard of Sleep Number, they're one of the largest mattress manufacturers and retailers in the USA. Now, my question to you, Edwin, is all or most economic indicators are pointing towards the worst recession in the US, possibly since the Great Depression. Current unemployment rates, for example, are already reflecting a pretty worrying scenario. And as is normal, the whole world is looking at the USA and how we'll respond and will recover. So my first open question is, what is your view from the ground?
Yes, thank you, Paolo. I'm honored to be on this webinar representing the USA. We are headquartered in Minnesota. To give context, that is in the middle of the United States bordering Canada in the north. And indeed, dire times in the United States. The current situation is unprecedented. I just read that a total of 36 million Americans are currently unemployed, and unemployment rate could hit 25–30% levels, which is just, you know, unprecedented, really dire times. And I've thought about that and I said, what does that actually mean? And I was listening to a webinar where a panel of business leaders in the United States were talking about that. They were a representation of manufacturing, services, healthcare, and government. And one company in the services industry had to let go of their entire staff, 450 people, just like that, within a matter of weeks, just gone. Another organization was basically shutting down their production line because reliant on the supply chain from abroad, it just stopped. So letting go of 1,000 people. A large retailer furloughed, which means putting on temporary leave. That's also what's happening. 40% of their staff. So it is just massive, this problem, and it shows you the magnitude what we're facing in the United States. So also on this webinar, organizations were thinking, okay, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this right now or after COVID-19? And the answer is productivity, process re-engineering, and innovation. You have got to figure out how to do more with less people, because that's the reality. These organizations were sharing that their window is only 3 to 6 months because there are so many unknown things. So I cannot imagine that with that short of a window, companies will be rehiring everybody back. So we'll be in a situation where there will be less capacity in terms of people. Also, financial survival. I mean, they're having massive losses right now, and they need to build back healthy margins. All of that means they have to be more productive, and that means letting your cost not grow as fast as your revenue does. But it's not just doing more with less, it's also doing things differently. I heard an example of a manufacturer that it's an airline manufacturing company. Once they start producing again, they have to redesign a production line. It's been in place for 25 years. Why? Because they have to deal with PPE, and PPE is personal protective equipment and 6 feet distance with people. They have to completely redesign it. But it's not just manufacturing. Healthcare is too figuring things out. They're trying to figure out how to care for patients in a remote way. In the past, that had a lot of resistance in our country here, with a lot of regulation around it, but they're getting waivers right now. They can ignore those regulations by figuring out how to care for patients in a remote way. They are creating new pathways to care for patients. And this is a funny example from a city even. They're even thinking about how can we renew their driver license, or how can we renew their car tax license. And they're using a Dropbox technique. Customers are just dropping their forms in the mailbox outside City Hall. It's closed. So then people will basically take the forms and mail them back to the folks. So, this is showing people are innovative. They are creative. And some of these ways will stick post-COVID-19. Back to you, Paolo.
Thank you, Edwin. I think that's particularly interesting, the fact that you mentioned that actually the situation is forcing us to become more innovative. As we're on a webinar talking about how Lean Six Sigma can help us become more innovative, it's pretty ironic and interesting that actually we're being forced to do that anyway. And so maybe the question is, how does Lean Six Sigma help us on the path we're already on? But we will come back to you a little bit later, Edwin. Thank you.
That's correct. You're welcome.
My next question, we will have to travel across the earth all the way to the Middle East, more specifically Oman. It's our colleague Zelko. Now, Zelko was born in former Yugoslavia, and he's a master in process engineering from the University of Belgrade. But he's a Dutch national with 15 years of working experience in the petrochemical and aluminium industry in Rotterdam. He then moved to the head office of Rio Tinto in Montreal, Canada, where he obtained the Master Black Belt certification in 2007, and he has since spent over 11 years in different continuous improvement roles. Currently working as a business improvement and strategy manager for Sohar Aluminium in the Sultanate of Oman. He also asked me to add that he is the best alpine skier amongst Master Black Belts and the best Master Black Belt among alpine skiers.
Thank you.
Our panel can comment on.
Appreciate it. Fine touch.
Zelko, my question to you. Many Middle Eastern countries, as we all know, have quite a strong dependence on the export of materials and energy. And many have local currencies pegged to the US dollar. How do we relate what's going on in the US to the Middle East in terms of similarities or differences?
I would say that, first of all, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the question and opportunity to talk about the region. I will not be speaking particularly about Oman, but about the region of the Middle East, of the GCC countries that have a lot in common. What they do have in common is that they went through the quite spectacular renaissance in the last 30 years. And one of the most colorful example of this renaissance is probably the Dubai. If you look at that city, it's a world metropolis in terms of architecture and technological advancement, while the first high building was built in 1991. Now, this spectacular change has been materialized and achieved by, I thought I switched off the baby phone, but I didn't. Just a moment. I have to do this a hard way.
It's the beauty of online webinars, the authenticity.
Yes, yes. It's not easy to switch it off, actually. Or at least I don't know how.
He or she just wants to participate.
Yes. So sorry for this, guys. So this wonderful renaissance that can be seen in all the countries across, in Oman, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Qatar, in United Arab Emirates, with exception of Yemen that it's torn by war, it's actually based on oil and gas revenue. And this formula works as following. The company based on ownership of the government, of majority ownership of the government as a joint ventures with the major Western companies in the field of exploitation of oil and gas are creating revenue that goes to the government, and they are wisely investing in developing infrastructure, in developing the buildings, hospitals, new businesses, new industries, and jobs. And this formula has worked very well till 2014, when in 2015, the price of oil and gas went to around deeper level than ever before, and then stabilized later around, let's say, $50, $60. But most of those countries need much higher price to sustain this model. Let's say that one of those countries in particular would need probably $75. And with the COVID-19 and the latest changes in the market, the prices of the oil at a certain point even touched $12 per barrel. And now they're going back to around 30. So they are far away from sustainable economic model. And this is very well realized. They realized the two things. They need to improve on their productivity for 30 or 50% by the major milestones. And secondly, they need to diversify. They need to move away from oil and gas-based revenue by innovation, by diversification of the business, by creating the businesses. And they are aiming for the high-tech businesses, mid and small-sized businesses that will be occupied by the young people coming from university with great knowledge and leverage on the accessibility of technology, such as 3D printers and the cloud, the mass database and technological revolution in the world to create new business and completely new business model. And alternative energy, in particular the sun energy, sun-based energy, takes a big part of it. So strategically, and here people and countries and governments care a lot about strategy, and they invest a lot of time and money and knowledge and expertise to develop their long-term strategy. And if I take Oman in particular, their 2040 strategy is to be 95% GDP-based revenue on non-oil and gas base, to be based on the mid and small-sized companies that are going to be developed between now and then. And this to be financed from the existing means of oil and gas revenue, which means they're really working on increasing efficiency and on the innovation. On both fronts, they are really, really serious. And when we are talking about increasing efficiency, there is a strong realization, in particular, that lean is the way to go. And there is a strong pull for the lean productivity deployment from big government organizations and companies and entities. To less extent to the Six Sigma, but maybe more because the benefits of the Six Sigma are less understood and less known in the region. The second, they are serious about innovation. They invested significant money in developing infrastructure, particularly around academic institutions that have the latest technology, such as the metal 3D printers. For instance, 1 in 12 existing in the world is at Socher University here close to me. That is accessible to the public, to everyone who has idea, who wants to produce something that might have value, that might become a product. And they developed a lot of actually government support organization that will finance and provide the knowledge and all kind of support that is needed for startup companies to materialize and create value from good ideas and commercial products that they are going to develop around those infrastructure, around the academic institution. The third and most important thing is the locals are not losing jobs. The expatriates, and there is a huge population of expatriates, are losing jobs and will be losing jobs. This is their buffer, how they can react to the economic pressure, and they can rehire them relatively easy if the tide changes, if the economy shifts to another direction. But Omanis, Saudis will not be losing jobs. There is even the legal regulation that prevents this from happening. So the situation is actually very different than in United States of America.
Thank you, Zelko. I definitely hadn't heard of the 2040 plan for Oman. I think it's bold, it shows innovation, and perhaps there are many countries who need to look at that sort of bold plan for the next two decades. I think it's brilliant. Now, we went from west to east, and we're going to go a little bit further east and further south to our colleague Pradesh in Sri Lanka. Now, Pradesh is currently working as the CEO of the Lean Six Sigma company in Sri Lanka, but he has over 14 years of industry experience, including many senior management positions in leading multinational companies in Sri Lanka, including the Alpha Time Group, and as head of planning for Ascot Nobel Paints. Welcome, Pradesh. Now, Zelko talked a little bit about the economic dependence on oil and gas in the Middle East and the considerations to be had on the back of that. Asian countries traditionally play a very important role in the global supply chain, which is now being threatened or at the very least shaken. In fact, we know that protectionist trends such as Made in America, USA goods are examples that are only gaining more traction. The same thing is happening in Europe. How do you see this affecting Asian economies? And what are some of the key points to consider coming out of this pandemic specifically for Asia and Asian countries?
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Paulo, giving me the introduction. So yeah, so nothing left for me to introduce myself again. Thanks a lot. Yeah, answering to your question, looking at the current situation in Asia, actually, currently we are experiencing the worst economic downturn in the last 40 years. We've been through oil crisis and stock market crash in 1973, and Asian financial crisis in 1997, and global recession in 2008 and 2009. But this is the worst. As per the latest numbers, the predictions, so Asian economy will grow only by less than 1% in 2020. So that's the latest prediction. So you have an idea what sort of a situation the Asian side is going through. So apart from supply side issues with the domestic containment measures and social distancing, the biggest impact is due to significant decrease in global demand as the entire global economy is contracting. Unlike previous economic crisis situations, this time due to health measures such as social distancing and self-isolation, the service sector is having the hardest hit of all. And the tourism sector, tourism industry is experiencing the biggest hit. As per the latest numbers, so the latest data, in Asia Pacific region alone, at least 15.3 million workers in tourism sector are at risk. Apart from that, other service sector industries like transport services, hotels, restaurants are closed down due to health measures and regulations. So that is from the service sector. So if you move to the manufacturing part, so in the manufacturing sector, also badly affected with supply chain interruptions. Production of textile and garments, construction, agriculture, and retail are some of the key negatively impacted industries in manufacturing sector. Yeah, so far I have explained the negative side of it. But at the same time, there are few positives also we can see, few opportunities. So if I explain few of them, increase in healthcare related products, export is a major highlight. So recently, Brandix, the single largest exporter of Sri Lanka, shipped 200 million face masks to US. So this will be a huge boost to apparel industry, so which contributes over 40% of export income of Sri Lanka actually. Other than that, more companies start to invest heavily on a digital platform to face similar kind of situations in future. The retail sector is a good example for that. So it also will help them to reduce cost, boost efficiency, and speed up the delivery. And there will be a major paradigm shift in service sector that I really need to highlight. So one particular area to highlight is education sector. Education is one good example for that. So in Asian countries, people are used to learn in physical classroom environment. That's how they used to learn. With this COVID-19 pandemic, so we have seen many education institutes, including major universities in the continent, have started to offer their programs in virtual learning environment. So, so this thing we believe will continue even after the pandemic. So back to you, Bhago. Paro, you are not audible.
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, guys, I'm back. Thank you. I was just saying that actually some of the opportunities you highlighted, particularly for Asia, I think are true for many countries around the world, particularly the changes we're going to have to adapt to in terms of learning. I think even, the Lean Six Sigma company ourselves, we had to adapt with the lack of availability in classroom courses, and one of the things we did was online courses, and that's just a very quick example of how, as a corporation, we've had to change. I think the same needs to happen, and we've seen happening all over the world.
Yeah, that is one area we really need to seriously look at. Yes.
I also like how you have differentiated between manufacturing and services. And this is something that I'm going to question you on a little bit later, if that's okay.
Okay, okay.
Now, we go back to the West, not as West as USA. We're going to the UK. So my next question is for Michel. He's the guy, the small guy you're seeing in that virtual office. I promise in reality, he's actually a pretty big bloke. Michel and his brother look after the Lean Six Sigma company in the UK. And Michel is a UK Lean Six Sigma master black belt, trained by General Electric, educated as a lawyer, and a specialist Lean Six Sigma in finance. Michel, my question to you, if I may, sir. Governmental responses to the global pandemic have been relatively consistent in Europe, both the EU and the UK, and both have introduced unprecedented rescue packages for corporates and insane individuals. Now, the vast amount of debt being amounted will have consequences for Europe and the UK, Europe as a whole. What do you think will be the main consequences for European countries, corporations, and citizens?
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. We appreciate it, Paolo. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, ladies and gentlemen. The question, first of all, is you're asking about Europe. The first thing I have to say is that Europe is not Europe. Europe, you can split up into Northern Europe, Western Europe. You can look at even the South, Eastern Europe. And you see all these different parts of Europe with different levels of economic development. You will also see that there's a different form of budgetary discipline in every European country. That has been let loose now. So that's something you're absolutely right about, Paolo. You see that many countries who were very strict in the past now have spent more money. That will mean something for many countries. But whatever I say, it is clear that Europe is hit very hard by the pandemic of COVID-19. and not only from an economical point of view, but from a social point of view too. So the world has changed for Europe as such. And when I look at the businesses, what does it mean for the businesses? What do you want to do? Well, I guess we're faced with a new world, so we have to adapt to that new world. We have to change our way of working. Continuing what we're doing, firefighting, fighting symptoms, doing things 3 or 4 times, probably is not going to work anymore. So we need to continuously improve our business. And we have a serious problem. A serious problem is that we don't have all the data. So a lot of decisions are made in business without all the data being available. Now, a few things are obvious, and already mentioned before, Pradeep was mentioning it. You'll see that, first of all, the lockdown and the technology we're actually using now will lead to a different way of working. So the economies will look different. 9 to 5 working is probably not going to be the norm. You could ask yourself, will we have the same traffic jams in the UK again compared to last year? You could also ask yourself, are people going to go to their work in shifts? And for manufacturing plants, you could ask yourself, you know, how are you going to look at the layout to make sure that your staff is safe when they start working? Now, also learning will change. And again, my colleague Pradeep already mentioned that. Learning, and Misha mentioned that, learning will become different. You'll see that there will be more online learning, and I think you should indeed combine it with a blended form of learning, where you also see a face you can talk to and you can ask questions for too. As a last point, and Pradeep was mentioning it, I have some very bad news too for some economic sectors here in Europe, and that is for the travel industry and the tourism sector. It will probably be a very long time before that returns to its normal level. Now, what do we do about that? Well, we can sit down in a corner and cry. It's not going to help. What we need to do is we need to innovate. We need to find new ways of doing things. And we've already seen this. We've seen drive-through cinemas in Germany. We've seen a lot of restaurants becoming takeaways. And I guess the next step in innovation will be done by entrepreneurs who will look at things like corona-free flights, corona-free resorts. Maybe hotels are going to look at their processes for cleaning rooms and decide they want to be corona-free. Now, saying this, I'm actually saying something pretty serious, because I'm saying that maybe continuous improvement and adaptation to a new situation isn't enough, but you would actually have to redesign that environment. And Lean Six Sigma does have a methodology for that, designed for Lean Six Sigma. My colleague Zelko is a specialist in that area. And that might be the next move, or one of the next moves that's going to happen. But in summary, it's hard hit. We need to innovate, and we need to see that as an opportunity. But at the same time, as Paolo said at the beginning, we should realize that from a human point of view, this is a dramatic situation we're in. Back to you, Paolo.
Thank you very much. I think my personal key takeaway from there was not just specific to Lean Six Sigma, but generally, it's not just about improving the way we work, but actually it could be a case of completely redesigning what we do and how we did it. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about that shortly. My last question for the first part of the webinar, and then we'll have been introduced to all of the panelists, is to Amin, who looks after the Lean Six Sigma company in Africa, for the whole of Africa. Amin is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt with 14 years of experience in the deployment of Lean Six Sigma in the manufacturing industries and in the service sector. And as I mentioned, he's the director of Lean Six Sigma Company Africa. Amin.
Thanks, Paolo. Thanks, Paolo, for the introduction. So welcome, everybody. Great to have you all here. And as you mentioned, I'm Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. I'm at the same time director of Lean Six Sigma Company Africa, operating in all Africa countries. Yeah. I will start with the good news. Good news is that Africa, unlike the other continents, have not been dramatically touched by the COVID-19 as the other continent. So only 2%, just 2% of the total people infected in the world are from Africa. And this is despite fragile healthcare system in many African countries. And if we talk about some examples, some of countries like Rwanda, like Ethiopia, like Mauritius, like Tunisia, these countries are one of the first in the continent that they have introduced strict measures like mandatory 2-week quarantine on arrivals from abroad, like night curfew, like a lockdown for 2 weeks. And if you have the chance to go there in one of the countries there, you will find that in the airport, the travelers were questioned about their travel history, about their health. They were testing their temperature, recording the temperatures, and also travelers, when they go to the passport control, they found kind of awareness banners about COVID-19. So some other action that this country took is that the flights to and from high-risk area like in France or Spain, these flights were suspended. So they found already a good strategy in terms of eradicating this virus from the very beginning. So they followed kind of strategy focusing on tracing, testing, and also isolating contacts of positive case, and even the wide members of the same community were also isolated if they test positive as well. So the hospitals there were not overwhelmed with patients. So I think this is good news also for Africa. And we have seen also some very brilliant ideas in some countries, like in Tunisia, for instance. We have seen kind of police robot that has been on patrol during the lockdown. And if they spy anyone who is walking on the street, they ask them questions, they ask to show their ID, and the officer in the back office, they are controlling and checking this. So that's the good news regarding Africa continents. I hope it will be in the future, the same thing. But nevertheless, we should be very, very careful as the COVID-19 virus is spreading very, very fast around the world. And we are not yet immune to this virus. So safety is more and more the center of all the effort made by the companies, by the stores, by the supermarket, because some of them will remain open during the COVID-19 era, but some of them will reopen again. So already safety is a subject which is very, very important. And the question is how Lean Six Sigma can support this effort to tackle this virus, how Lean Six Sigma and safety goes together. So this is what I will talk about later.
Absolutely, and we look forward to you expanding on that. I think there are a variety of points, opportunities, causes, issues on the back of this pandemic. But if there's one thing we need to probably get right first time round, is how we resume our lifestyles in the safest way possible. So that's definitely up there in terms of the agenda points. Next point is that I think you're right in terms of Africa. Was fortunate that the virus arrived perhaps later on than it did in certain countries, but what it did do well is it acted pretty early. But to your point, it still really is early stage. I think it's important to stress that actually, whilst in China and Europe we're already thinking about post-COVID, we're seeing pretty horrific examples of the current situations in South America, for example, and other countries that are still a bit behind on the curve. So we hope that the reality of Africa maintains itself and continues. Now, our panel have highlighted some of the key considerations in their part of the world as a result of the pandemic. And shortly, I will ask the panel to further comment on how we can utilize Lean Six Sigma to overcome some of these issues. And more importantly, how it can be used to help reinvent our economies, industries, and ourselves. But before we do so, I think it's important, particularly for those of us who don't know Lean Six Sigma as well, to get a bit of a rounded view of Lean Six Sigma so that we can make the most out of the second part of this webinar. So I've asked Michelle from the UK, who also is the voice of much of our online training, to give us a brief overview of Lean Six Sigma, if you will, Michelle.
Thanks. I hope you can see, I can see my top of the head. Before that, I see the polling results. Well, first of all, Paolo, you're taking a risk, because I can spend here and talk for 3 days about Lean Six Sigma, and most of you guys in the webinar will probably be asleep by then. But I'll just give you the highlights. Just want to tell you what it is. First question you need to answer before you use anything in life is, why would you want to use it? And why is it important? Well, first of all, Lean Six Sigma is something about continuously adapting, improving your processes, the way you work. That's what you're trying to do. And we do that because everything changes. Regrettably, with this COVID-19, everything really changed. So it was very dramatic. And before this, we didn't use a structure, and a lot of companies didn't use a structure. They would use firefighting, just fighting symptoms. And of course, that becomes more dangerous if you enter a situation where everything changes more dramatically. Now, there are many structures like Lean Six Sigma. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm going to talk about Lean Six Sigma. So what do I want you to remember? That's basically what I want to do. I want to talk about the dance of Six Sigma and the dance of Lean. First, you're talking about Lean Six Sigma, so they're combined, right? I'm going to start with Six Sigma, and it works in projects. So part of it is project management, if you look at it. It works in phases called the make, and that is what most people will remember. What does that mean? That means define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Now, just to give you the highlights, in the define phase, what you're really trying to do in a structured way is to determine the problem. What is the problem statement? What is hurting? And you want to find out how that affects the business and eventually, obviously, the customer. And then you want to devise, in some way, are the requirements that the customer has? Does he know what is good and bad, or she know is good and bad? The rest of it is actually just project management. And I'm not saying anything derogatory about project management, but it means making a project charter, a business case, a project plan, a timeline, setting up your team, going through a review session. That's basically project management to me. Now, if define was really about the problem and the impact on the customer, measure is about the process. Because if we want to improve or adapt anything because of a problem, we need to know what we do. And if we want to know what we do, it means we have to understand our process. And we do not only want to collect data on the process and understand the process, we actually also want to know how good are we. So how often do we disappoint our customer, which is called a defect? And we can express that in terminology such as a sigma level, a Z-score. But in essence, what we're doing is we're saying this is the magnitude of the problem. And once there is a magnitude of the problem, you can go to the next phase, analyze. And by nature, the word says analyze. So you're going to find out, why is there a problem? What are the root causes? And the difference with firefighting is that here we actually also want to provide evidence that it's a root cause. Now, if you know the root causes, the obvious thing to do is to find the solutions, and not the obvious solutions, the one which are not obvious, where you need creativity. And once you have these solutions, you'll probably look at the risks. You'll probably make sure that you don't pick 200 solutions, but you kind of select the key solutions. You will then probably test them, conduct a pilot, a proof of concept, whatever you call it, and that will give you data again. And then you can compare what you have now after the test to what you had before the test, and hopefully you're better. And then comes the most difficult part of Six Sigma, and that is you have to present to somebody because you're asking for money. And that is, in the COVID-19 period, is going to be difficult because a lot of businesses are not going to have money to invest. So I'm really curious how that's going to pan out in the future. Well, if you get a solution and it is approved, what happens in control is a logical thing, is you implement it. And very often that's the only thing we do, but we should also make sure it is locked in, sustained, standardized, that there is a control plan, that there is a response plan. Because as you know, a famous German general said, after the first shots are fired, the plan is ruined. So nothing works according to plan. And as the last part of control, you want to understand, what lessons did I learn? And that is about a mentality, which I'll get to in a minute. Now let me talk about Lean. Lean, you have basically 5 principles derived from an author called Womack, which is mostly used in the Western world. The first 2 principles are actually quite similar to define and measure, if you think about it. The first principle is define customer value. That's what we did in define. What are the requirements of a customer? What is value adding for that customer? What does he want to pay for or she want to pay for? The second step in those principles is map the value stream. How do I map the value going from me to the customer? And in essence, that's just the way we work. So you're mapping out a process. So that's kind of the same. And then the next step, that's quite slightly different, is create flow. Make sure the value gets to the customer without any blocking or any blocks as quickly as possible. And if necessary, you also want to look at the next principle, pull. You want to deliver to the customer at the right time, the right product, which is not too different from actually what Six Sigma is trying. Now, the last principle, which is striving for perfection, kind of tells you what Lean Six Sigma is and what I want you to remember. That's a mindset. It means you want to continuously get better at things. So there's two things you can do. You can say, you can whine about all the changes, or you can reverse that and see that as opportunities for innovation. And that will help you actually improve a situation you're in. The big enemy really is actually firefighting. You want to create a structure where with data, you improve processes and you adapt processes. That is my that wasn't 3 days, right, Paolo? That was short enough.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much. In fact, I'm not even going to give you my own opinion. I'm going to quote one of our participants. Abdurrahim said it was a fantastic summary. So well done.
Thank you, Abdul.
I think to Michelle's point, being able to summarize Lean and Six Sigma in, I think, 3.5 minutes is truly impressive. To give you an idea, our longest course is 10 days, black belt in manufacturing. So,
sorry, I must say that it looked like it was recorded, like made the perfect recording and then played out with the background.
You don't realize, Elko, I'm a hologram actually, so it's recorded. It is recorded.
That's impressive, man.
Well done.
It's on the online courses, am I right?
Yeah.
Part of it, I guess, but it's just what I think.
Brilliant. Well, I think it was perfect. I think in terms of this webinar, I think all of you guys have set the scene in terms of what's going on in the countries and continents really well. And after that summary of Lean Six Sigma, I think I'm pretty confident that we, as part of almost like an attendee, will now absorb the rest of the webinar in a lot better way now that we have a Lean Six Sigma background for those of us who didn't already have them. And so I'm pretty excited about the next set of questions, which will really dig into both how we can utilize these tools, cultures, and methods you've mentioned into solving some of the problems that you guys have highlighted in the beginning of the webinar. So my first question, post Michelle, I'm going to go back to Amin because I think actually you touched on safety earlier, but I think we should strike the iron while it's hot. So now one of the most important aspects facing the entire world, as we've mentioned, is how we look to resolve lives in terms of the health and safety, everything that is involved with health and safety, everything from going back to work and making sure that standards are there to actually health and safety at home, public transport, etc. Now, Michelle's actually mentioned, and I quote, the factories, for example, must ensure their workspaces are coronavirus free. You know, so simple things like that in order for us to really get back into the swing of things are absolutely vital. And I know, I mean, you've worked with a few companies on this topic already. So could you on what are the key challenges to consider here and how Lean Six Sigma can help?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paolo. So the main question is how can Lean Six Sigma thinkers and practitioners, they can help and support the effort to tackle this virus, as I mentioned before. So in this context, Lean and safety should be addressed simultaneously. So the integration of Lean and safety can help companies to achieve a really competitive edge, which is critical while providing safe workplace. So as the COVID-19 is really spreading around the world, the organization, they have to respond to some challenges. One of the challenges that can highlight is how can we be sure that no one sick comes to the work? And what are the preparations and what are the safety measures, what are the policy that can be put in place to protect either the customers and the workers. So it's really clear that we need creative solution for that. And we all know how lean thinking is really very powerful when it comes to find solutions. So we know that lean philosophy has proven potential to help business in order to improve, for instance, operational efficiency, productivity, reduce losses, but also is very helpful to have a safe workplace. And I can mention for that some examples of Lean Six Sigma applications in terms of having safe workplace. And for instance, we can talk about the risk assessment, which is kind of FMEA. So it's basically based on identifying the hazards, assessing the risks, trying to reduce the risk at a certain level, and trying after that document the results. So it's kind of iterative process, which is to be continued until tolerable risk is attained. And in my opinion, this is very critical, mainly now in this period of time when we should think about the contagion inside the company. So we talk about how we can detect sick people. We can talk also about the contagion frequency and also contagion gravity, and how we can detect this easily. So if you talk about the detection, for instance, I have one of my customers that implement kind of pokayoke, mistake proofing, in order to prevent sick person to enter the plant. So what they have done so far is mass temperature testing, which is really the right countermeasure that should be done. And that was perfect. But one of the problems that appears on the surface is that the time spent in order to do the temperature testing is very high, and time. So the problems is how to reduce the time, because they said that the cycle time of mass temperature testing is very high, and we would like to reduce it. So they have done a kind of takt time analysis in order to compare the cycle time to takt time. And they find finally a solution to reduce this time by buying a thermal camera in order to reduce the detection time, and also having more accurate results. One of the other examples of that tackle the frequency of the contagion is because if we talk about frequency of the contagion, this requires time compression to ensure we are exposed to the potential risk of infection for a short time for a short period of time. And one of the measure also is what we call the social distancing, the 6 feet meter, or the 6 feet or the 2 meters, depends on where we are. And this is the aim of this is to stave off the spread of COVID-19. So the key here is to start rethinking, as mentioned by Michel, is the design of the process, and in order to have safe workflow. So the question was how to ensure that manufacturing, sales, and assembly lines and some other workplaces are safe with regards to social distancing. And with regards to that, and in order to develop safe workflow, a very simple tool can be used with this spaghetti diagram in the context of physical distancing to help make the work safer. But for some jobs, sometimes we can't ensure social distancing. So they can wear a face mask or gloves, or sometimes plexiglass barriers. And for some other jobs, we can do that. So we may be probably going to see some very creative problem solving here, using maybe the A3 methodology or DMIC projects in order to find solutions. And once the solution is defined, I think that this will be the standard of work, and in order to ensure high level of safety and maintain the safe distance to enable people to follow the 2-meter rules. So I think this is the interaction between Lean Six Sigma and safety. And another example of how to reduce the contacts between customers in the store or in the other companies, you can see that there is some visual management. We can talk about 5S visual management that popping up all over the places to help ensure that people maintain the physical distancing while shopping or while doing their business. And the impact of that is really easy to see. And so the application of 5S and visual management, which are not complicated tools, that can help company to reduce the frequency of contagion. So the 5S tools used for workplace organization can also the basis for creating a safe workplace. And, I think that the 5S can be said the foundation of integration of lean and safety. I have some customers that call this 6S, so they are incorporating the safety into the 5S pillars in order to allow professionals to think specifically about safety, about risk, about hazards. But whether you are calling this 5S or 6S, it's really clear that the principles are creating safer workplace. And we all know that lean is very good in terms of improving efficiency, but also can help us in order to ensure safe and comfortable environment for our teams across the workflow. I can also highlight another point, which is the value stream. Michel talked about the value stream map. And I think that if you'd like to enhance the safety culture within our organization, we should, as Lean Six Sigma practitioner, include the safety in the value stream of our processes. So we'll find some metrics related to the safety and added to the value stream. And the waste related to it will be tracked in the very first stage of Lean implementation. So this will help us in order to integrate the initiatives of safety and also productivity and other initiatives. So I think waste related to safety issues should be considered by Lean practitioner from the very beginning and from the value stream stage, and which is the most primary step of any project. So yeah. And one other point I would like to highlight so far is that in most of the organizations, the effort related to Lean and safety, unfortunately, is tackled by completely different groups. So continuous improvement is handled by Lean teams, by CIP, by CPI, whatever you call this. And risk management is handled by health and safety team. So I think that the Lean facilitator should be given also training in safety principles, and also the health officials, health and safety officials should be trained in the underlying philosophy of Lean. And when safety officials are involved in Lean initiatives, they are really, they can anticipate the potential safety problems. And this is how we can see the link between Lean Six Sigma and safety. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that very, very thorough response. I think you're right. I mean, in short, if there is a set of methodologies and culture that is very appropriate for tackling health and safety, the Lean Six Sigma is one of them. Everything from around reduce waste, if you create poor, if you produce the right amount of quantities, then you're leaving less to chance and therefore leaving less to possible contagion, and the implications are endless. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Ragnar in the chat even said great, including safety in the VSM, but how can we do it? So perhaps that's something, if we have time at the end, you can help explain a little bit. But I think the concepts you mentioned are brilliant. Thank you. Now, I want to go back to the USA because there was something particular that Edwin talked about, which was the need to do more with less, which I think is apparent all over the world now post-coronavirus. Could you firstly talk a little bit more about that, Edwin? But also, what's your view on the notion that, and this is something Michel touched on earlier as well, that companies now have to focus on surviving. This will be the main focus for so many companies. And yourself, you talked about the amount of companies which are now letting people go. So how do you justify spending time and money to incorporate Lean Six Sigma where it wasn't already in existence now?
Yep, great. Thank you, Paolo. And thanks for all my colleagues who really, I saw a key theme in what they said, innovation and efficiency. Doing more with less, is that even possible? Yes, in my experience, absolutely. I always say in all sorts of jobs that I have observed, there is what I call hidden productivity. meaning people are capable of producing more within their job. And I'm not saying they need to be working harder. Let's have them work 11 hours instead of 8 hours a day. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they need to be working smarter and not on tasks that don't add value. It's not uncommon to see 25, 30% productivity increases if we were to figure out how to eliminate those tasks that don't add any value. So what are those tasks? Things like wait times, rework loops, because you're not meeting your customer needs effectively. You gotta redo your products and your services. Correcting errors on the form, wasting time looking up for information that was not given to you, making sure that forms are complete. All of these things, what we call in lean, are waste. And if you were able to eliminate that, you can improve productivity substantially with individuals. And that's Lean Six Sigma. That is the need for Lean Six Sigma. And so we're facing in the United States a workforce that is at much reduced levels. And if the economy starts growing again, you gotta do more with less. I don't see that they're immediately gonna rehire everybody back. And that means you need to become more efficient. You need to become more productive. And that means process re-engineering. My colleagues already talked about that. And for that, you need Lean Six Sigma. That's at the heart of what we do as specialists. But you also need to be thinking about that in combination with robotics and automation. And yeah, re-engineering processes to be less reliant on human labor. Don't think the world will be the same as it was before. So if there is a message I can tell everybody on this webinar, you need to be thinking process, process, process. Because if you don't, you'll be behind your competitors because they're doing it. They're thinking about it. They're accepting the new normal. If you don't want to lose market share, you have to figure out the process and be smarter, better reliable products, create a better customer experience than your competitors. If you wait, you'll be behind the 8 ball. So Lean Six Sigma is critical for survival. But to your point, you might say, I don't have time for Six Sigma. I am in survival mode. This is not something I can be dealing with right now. Agreed. If you are in survival mode, it will be tough. It will be tough to also spring up a whole bunch of Lean Six Sigma projects. But again, your competitors are doing it. But think about it also. We already have had to deal with a response to COVID-19. We have protocols in place to think about safety, to think about perhaps redesigning our processes. We have emergency plans in place. You did your firefighting. Don't stay in it. Again, you need to accept this as the new normal. Your competitors are. I wanted to share something with you, what I have done effectively in my career when I was leading a Lean Six Sigma program at Sleep Number. We actually invested in full-time people. Investing in full-time people allows you to do continuous improvement every day. Not part-time, but every day, full-time. And during the crisis in 2008 and 2009, where a lot of my colleagues were let go at levels that we're seeing today, the board of directors and the senior management team made the decision to keep a small team of Six Sigma individuals full-time employed. Why? Because they had the vision, we were working on product quality, that reputation was important once the economy starts growing again. I'm sharing this example with you because investing in a small amount of people, I'm not talking an army of black belts, I'm talking a few individuals that all they do is think about productivity and efficiency is gonna pay off. They are gonna earn themselves back within the year. Some organizations in the USA are using stimulus money they're getting from the government or grants or loans to invest in continuous improvement. The last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to leave you with, is I always say, if you do things part-time, nothing will happen. So if you're serious about innovation, if you're serious about process re-engineering, do it full-time. Thank you.
For this.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point that is talked about a lot internationally here at the Lean Six Sigma company. We see it happen quite a lot where where companies half invest in a continuous improvement model. And I think some of the examples you just shared with us, and thank you for sharing a very personal example, shows the value of actually, if you're going to do it, then it has to be a full-time job. Sometimes doesn't really get the Lean Six Sigma culture. It has to be, well, first of all, everyone all the time, of course. But if you can't get everyone all the time, then you need to start with at least a few people full-time. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And it's not uncommon that they will earn their salary back to a level 4 or 5 times what you're investing. So this is worth it. This will pay back itself back. It's self-funded. So do it full-time.
Absolutely. I think when we think of the cost of bringing in outside and continuous improvement experts to solve certain problems for certain projects, and the pound value, the pound, US dollar, euro value of that always has to be high multiples. The effect of having someone doing that full time can only be more positive. So once again, thank you for that, Edwin.
You're welcome.
To Oman again with our colleague Zelko. And this is a topic I'm personally very interested in. Michelle has already said that you're the expert on this, so I'm going to pick on you for this. Expecting big things. We've talked about Lean Six Sigma not just being about improving existing processes, which I think is very exciting. I think especially in the time we're in at the moment, innovation has to be at the forefront of people's minds. Can you touch a little bit more on how Lean Six Sigma can actually be used to help reinvent and create?
Yes. First, I would like to thank Michelle for the compliment. Any compliment from Michelle, which is the expert that you all witnessed, is really personally great recognition for me. I can't say that I'm expert, but I'm definitely passionate about innovation and the Lean Six Sigma. You see, what Michelle was talking about is the make process, which is the Lean Six Sigma process that is put in place to improve already existing processes and improve the quality of the products that does not meet the customer requirements, being the external customer or the next step in the process to the sufficient level. We do have a completely different process in Lean Six Sigma, which is called Design for Lean Six Sigma, or DMIDV, Define, Measure, Analyze, Design, Validate, that it's put in place to develop something completely new, something that doesn't exist, starting from the blank piece of paper and the customer requirements. It's the process that is somewhat similar to the make. It has some common tools and concepts, but also fundamentally different. The phases are different, the tools in the phases are different, and there are in particular few very powerful tools and concepts in DMIDV that are fostering innovation. So when we are talking about innovation and how the Lean Six Sigma can help innovation, besides the make process that is also rich in the tools and concepts for analyzing root causes, which is the start of any innovation, understanding where the problem is that you need to tackle, designing something completely new, thinking creatively and meeting customer requirements in the same time and channelizing appropriately the energy of innovation that it's in head and hearts of the people is better done through the DMIDV. Now, the DMIDV had a very limited market in the past because the research and development innovation work was reserved for the big multinational companies that did have a budget and money to invest in research and development. And they had their own processes, which I think are not very different than Design for Lean Six Sigma. They are differently branded. But we are witnessing the big change in the world. If you're looking at our time, you know, the time is going slow, like you don't see the minutes moving on the clock, but we actually did witness a big change. This mobile phone accessibility is the big revolution that we witnessed in our lifetime. And the one is happening at the moment with the Sky cloud technology, access to the big database, and with the 3D printing, we are seeing democratization of the R&D process. It's moving from the big companies into the smaller entities, into the mid and small size businesses. Basically, the 3 smart and talented guys with a small garage in the backyard can do the miracles today. And this is what is a big change. Now, as I said, here, particularly in the region, the countries wisely and enormously invested in developing infrastructure and facilities to foster the innovation. This is the concept very different and unknown in the West. You know, in the West, first you need to have a business case, and then you need to justify it and to prove the return on investment. And if you get approved, then you will get investment and you will buy 1 3D printer for this particular task. They have 30 3D printers in the university, Sultan Qaboos University in Muscat, set in place with the last technology in reverse engineering, the last state-of-the-art technology in metal and wood transformation machines that are put in place to really enable people who do have ideas to come and to make them happen. And they are now looking for the ideas, and they are looking for those peoples. They invested the money and now they're looking what to do with it instead of making the business case first. And this is what is happening at the moment. And the people are also there. There are great, bright, young, motivated people coming out of universities that want to make things happen. They want to have their own company. They want to drive Ferrari. They want to be successful. And there is a supporting structure. What is really missing, what they will benefit from, is the process which will give them the steps to vigor the structure and helping tools to do so. And there are some wonderful, inspiring tools in DMIDV, such as the trees or functional analysis or detailed design that are not part of the make that can really, really make a difference. So I worked with DMIDV in the past, and I was frustrated by the fact that market was not really asking for it as much as I wanted to put it on. But I think that the change with the COVID-19 and the change that is happening in the region, which I would call the perfect storm actually for the case of the Lean Six Sigma in general, is opening a completely new set of opportunities, and that DMIDV might get his chance and his justice to show what is it worth for.
Thank you very much, Zelko. I think it's a super interesting topic. There's nowhere near enough time to talk about this in enough depth, or at least the depth it deserves to be talked about. Perhaps it's an idea for you to host the next global webinar on the same topic.
Maybe not to host, but
my job is easy. You're doing all the hard work. But I think one of the things you've highlighted, which is particularly interesting, is the dynamicness or flexibility around Lean Six Sigma in general. We've talked about how it can help improve processes. We've talked about how actually it's a tool to help innovate. And the truth is, it does apply for most people, whether you're working for a large corporation, whether you own a small business, or whether you're an entrepreneur looking at just your own daily life. And that really is one of the beautiful things about Lean Six Sigma, something I've definitely experienced in the last 12 months. So thank you again for that. Pradesh, I'm going back to you, my friend. There is a common misconception that Lean Six Sigma is for car companies or purely for manufacturing industries. This question is being directed to you because I like the way that you segregated manufacturing from services when you talked about the current situation for Asia. Now, we obviously know that this isn't the case. This isn't the case. I myself have worked at many investment banks and asset managers that all use some form of continuous improvement. But to what extent is Lean Six Sigma as powerful in the service sector as it is in the manufacturing world?
Okay. Thanks, Paolo. Firstly, asking me that question. That is actually one of the most common question for me in last. If you take last few months, I'm sure like even my colleagues also agree with me. One common question is Lean Six Sigma is for service industry. Of course, yes. So my first, simple answer is yes. Yeah, let me explain you. Before I answer to that, so your question, let's try to understand what service process is. So the products coming out of a manufacturing process are tangible, which means you can touch and feel, basically. But the outcome of a service process is intangible. So in the manufacturing sector, the product is tangible. That means you can touch and feel. But in service industry, the output is intangible. That's the main difference in between manufacturing and service industries. So if I give you some examples, banking sector, telecommunication, healthcare, tourism, defense, and software are some of the good examples for service industry. Okay. So, and one reason I believe why people are asking whether Lean Six Sigma is for the service industry, because there's a common belief that it is for manufacturing. Why? Because it actually started in manufacturing industry. So there are a few reasons why Lean Six Sigma is highly critical for service sector. If I go one by one, firstly, in manufacturing process, the actual product is going through the process and the customer sees it only at the end of the process. In contrast, in service process, it is the customer who is going through the process. That means customer is always interacting with the company throughout the process. So the possibility of the customer seeing the problems or the inefficiencies in the process is very high in service sector. To understand this further, let's take a simple example. So Paulo, you said so you are coming from financial sector. So I'm taking an example from financial sector. So consider simple bank loan process. So here the sequence of operations are applying for loan, document submission, negotiations, and final approval. And the customer interacts with the bank throughout these sub-processes. So I'm sure you can understand how critical it is. Secondly, second point to highlight actually, in manufacturing process, the waste can be seen physically. So it is easy to capture. So product defects, inventory buildup, unnecessary movements, bottlenecks are some of the good examples. But in service sector, it is very hard to see waste, as most of the processes are running on systems. So you will be able to see these waste only if you carefully map using certain lean techniques, maybe value stream map. So you will have to use those techniques to see those waste. Otherwise, it is really impossible. Finally, for a business, it is always important to keep the customer happy. That's our, the final objective. So for manufacturing companies, even if they produce defect products, they still can repair and finally deliver good product to satisfy the customer for the purpose of that. But it is not possible in service sector, as the customer is part of the entire process. And a problem in any part of the process will immediately make the customer unhappy. So considering all these factors, I'm sure you all agree with me, the Lean Six Sigma is very critical in service sector. And finally, now in all our discussion, in every part of the world with this COVID-19 pandemic, service sector is struggling. So not only in Asia, so my colleagues highlighted, all over the world, the service sector is struggling. So if I name few areas like financial, tourism, healthcare, education, whatever you look at, all the industries are struggling. So I believe this is really a good eye-opening for service sector people to consider Lean Six Sigma seriously. So, Paulo, I believe I have answered your question.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have. Absolutely. As you mentioned, I think I witnessed firsthand the importance and actually the potential still, which I think is super important. The potential, and then I've been out of the industry a little bit, so perhaps financial services firms have ramped up their continuous improvement efforts. I know some of the big banks have actual continuous improvement departments. My colleague Enrique here in Portugal is part of one of those, for example. But I still think there's a massive opportunity for operations departments in all sorts of financial services firms to look at continuous improvement, because actually the amount of waste that goes on in some of the departments is truly shocking, and they absolutely would benefit from something which absolutely is not just specific for manufacturing or cars. So thank you very much for that prediction.
My advice is this is the right time for them to look seriously Lean Six Sigma.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now we are nearing the 90-minute mark, which means we probably won't have time for Q&A. What we're going to do is we will answer every question that was submitted by email personally to all of you. But we do have time for one more question to Michelle. And Michelle, this question is partly because you're a big data lover, and partly because I wanted you to do my end of webinar conclusion for me.
Okay.
And so essentially, data, which we've talked about in a number of ways and formats throughout this webinar, is key to successfully implementing Lean Six Sigma projects. I think the increasing availability of data will only assist Lean Six Sigma projects, Lean Six Sigma lovers, and Lean Six Sigma in general. And Zelka talked a little bit about that, and there's a great amount of opportunity there. But more specifically to COVID-19, because the webinar does have a theme, which is COVID-19. How, in your opinion, and of course this is your opinion, do you think the availability of data or lack of it has shaped the global response to the coronavirus? And secondly, just after you do that, as we're literally on the 89-minute mark, if you could wrap up the webinar for me, and again, thank you in advance, by giving us what you think the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunity is as we corporations, more than anything, face in the medium term post COVID-19. Thank you, Michelle.
All right, thanks, Paolo. Well, first, I am a data-driven man, and I have to say that's partly out of necessity, because I would be all over the place if I wasn't. What I find now in this period is that, regrettably, in the past few months, we have made decisions for our UK operation, or have to make decisions based on no data. Not all the data was available. And this doesn't only relate to the COVID-19 pandemic, but other political issues. So the world you're in is a world where you don't have all the data. And to be honest, I find that frustrating. I find that one of the most frustrating things of this pandemic is that we don't really know everything. We will in a certain time, but maybe I'm too impatient for that. Then you asked me, what do I see as an opportunity, medium term, and what do I see as a challenge? Well, before I talk about opportunities and challenge, I think the first thing we should have in mind is that the COVID-19 pandemic is a disaster, a human disaster, and causes a lot of human pain. Now, as an opportunity, I want to bring it back to my world, the world of Lean Six Sigma. I think it is becoming really, really necessary at the moment in the post-COVID-19 world. A data-driven structure for your decisions, whether it is improvement, domain, whether it is design, DMI, DV, that is really depending on whatever direction you want to take, but you want to make decisions based on a structure and based on a structure with data. Now, what's the challenge? The challenge, that's quite funny, I guess, because we are a training company, is that we have to find the experienced, the capable, and the confident resources who will not act upon gut feel, but who will actually deploy this this data-driven mindset of improvement, adaptation, of redesign. And I personally believe that in the post-COVID era, that is where the battle will be won or lost.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that summary. I'm not going to conclude on top of your conclusion, but I do want to say a few words. First of all, I want to thank you all for giving us your time, dedication, the preparation for this webinar. I know some of the times in your particular. Your time zones are way out of sync for a webinar. For Adish, it must be nearing midnight where you are right now. So thank you all for
yes.
that. Yes, exactly. And I think on behalf of all the attendees, we want to say thank you. Now, as you'll probably appreciate, some of the concepts and topics we touched on we could easily talk about for hours and hours and days. And so actually, I know it was a real struggle for some of these experts on Lean Six Sigma to have to summarize their answers in such a short amount of time. But hopefully, what we did do was give you a little bit of glimpse into what's going on in the world post-COVID-19. I know as a bit of a Westerner that we often get silent what's happening, a little bit of information on America, and perhaps don't get much of an insight into what's going on in Africa or Asia, or the Middle East. So I hope it's been useful in terms of that. But secondly, I hope you can take away some of the things that Lean Six Sigma can do, some of the ways that Lean Six Sigma can really help, because not just because we are a training company that focuses on Lean Six Sigma, but I think as a panel, myself included, we really do believe if there's a time to invest in Lean Six Sigma training, whether at a personal level, whether on a corporative level, now is the time. So once again, thank you all for your time. I hope we've been deserving of the 90 minutes you've dedicated to us today. And we also hope that this will be the beginning of perhaps more regular international webinars. It's something that we're probably gonna talk about as a group. I can already see some of the feedback that you guys have given, with most of the scores in terms of how useful today's webinar being pretty high, which we're pretty happy with. And again, that's to you guys. So once again, thank you very much for your time. We will be in touch to follow up, whether it's just to get a little bit of feedback in terms of today, or actually give you some more information for those who are interested in some of our courses or Lean Six Sigma in general. So have a good evening, a good day, or a good afternoon, depending on where you are, and be safe. Thank you very much.
Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.